Hello, folks. Great to have Mark Taylor today from Cognizant. And we're going to talk about customer experiences. Mark, thank you for joining me. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about that particular unit within Cognizant.
Yep. Thanks, Vinnie. Pleasure to be here. So Mark Taylor, pretty new to Cognizant, relatively speaking, about a year, just over a year. I really came from the agency world in general. I spent all of my career in digital agencies of one sort or another, WPP, Publicis and others, and shifted to Cognizant, therefore, just over a year ago, for many reasons, which I think will become clear as we go through our discussion today. So very happy again to be here. Looking forward to sharing some of our war stories.
So Mark, let's start with the 2020 and the pandemic, right? So it seems like voice interfaces really took off. I've heard you talk about that. Yeah. Qualtrics just went IPO, so obviously customer sentiment seems to be hot. What else has changed in the last year? What's kind of top of mind when you think about customer experience?
So I think one thing that we've absolutely noticed, it's undeniable, I think it's industry-wide, I can only speak for myself, there's an acceleration towards a new way of interacting with customers. So it depends who you are. So we're seeing in life sciences, in the life sciences industry, for example, a much heavier push towards e-commerce. In insurance, a much heavier push towards direct-to-consumer and e-commerce. So certainly an acceleration in the way companies and brands interact with their consumers. I think there's a second thing which is happening that I feel is emerging as a trend. COVID, depending on the sector, obviously, but COVID had a very had a dual effect. The first effect was, hey, I've got to find new, different ways of connecting with my consumer. And the second one, my resources are constrained because of the economic climate. And I think those two things coming together, again, depends on the sector. Travel and hospitality was very, very impacted. So it's a great example. Retail, some retail, excuse me, is also a great example. But that dual imperative, I've got to get better at customer experience and I've got to do it more cheaply or more efficiently, really helps some companies, some of our clients, think more strategically about how they align their investments to meet specific needs in the customer journey. So those two things I would say, Vinnie.
So, I interviewed a number of vertical C-level executives all of last year. And it seemed like either to survive or to thrive, vertical applications suddenly became very important, right? If you were in healthcare, telemedicine took off. If you were in banking, obviously mobile banking took off. Digital real estate, virtual closings, PPP loan processing in banking because there were so many 5 million SBA loans and so on. And they kind of became the user interface, if you will, to a lot of customers, shadowing the legacy apps or even the bigger vendors. Have you seen that affecting customer experience now that we're dealing with smaller vendors, or not so much?
I think I would say it differently. I thought you were going to go in a different direction, to be honest. And I think certainly customer experience or experience, employee experience, customer experience, partner experience means different things to different verticals. There is no question. I actually thought you were going to go a slightly different direction with the scale point, because the scale point I think is really, really interesting. We just finished some research with Forrester. It's not been published yet, but we have the initial findings, and it's really interesting. The data points to the two things I think are fascinating. Number one, those companies who really are focused on the experience, whatever experience they're enabling, and they're conscious about how they enable that experience, are actually seeing while they're seeing an increase in Net Promoter Score, or however they measure their impact at the experience level, they're also seeing a reduction in cost in IT. I think that's fascinating. The second thing we're seeing is those companies that best reacted to COVID, so best reacted to external stimuli, were those companies that were more customer-centric by definition. Now, can I prove cause and effect? Causality, maybe not. But I'm sure that those companies who keep customer experience or the experiences that they're enabling as a centering philosophy, I can give you some examples of this, are the best able to react to external market forces. Why? Because they're used to reacting to changing consumer demands. And I think this notion of agility, the most important point here, Vinnie, is that this was true in the biggest organizations with the most legacy infrastructure, legacy applications and platforms. If they were focused on the experience they were enabling, they were more agile than their peers.
Well, you saw that in banking. When the SBA announced the PPP loans, I've heard from several small business people that community banks did much better than the big national banks, right? Talk about agility. I mean, clearly in the end, the bigger banks processed more in sheer volume, but the customer experience, the time it took and all that was fairly miserable. So the other thing that is obviously, you made the point, the pandemic made us very aware that human resources were at a premium. Either couldn't get them to the right places to work, or they were sick or whatever, right? So machines have certainly increased in importance in many, many, many roles, right? What have you seen in the customer service area in terms of generally?
Great point. It's a great point. So certainly, and it's no surprise, it's no secret that there's the massive increase in machine learning and artificial intelligence mostly in terms of assisting humans in the customer service universe. So rather than replacing humans, we're seeing it more in the sense of assisting humans right now. Over time, I really believe that AI will be one of the most significant influences on customer experiences at scale that we've seen. And why is that? For me, almost the most critical thing in an interaction between a consumer and a brand is the ability for the brand to act like a human. Mm. If you think of the most important interactions in any customer journey, they're most often face-to-face, human-to-human interactions. The point of sale, the call, the complaint call, the insurance claim, they're most often today human-to-human interactions. I think artificial intelligence, well-tuned, well-conceived, and well executed, can enable a brand to behave in that human kind of way at a scale that humans alone cannot do. So what is a brand acting like a human? Well, it's pretty simply listening first. Humans listen very, very well. It's secondarily adapting to a given situation, to a given input instantly. It's changing your tone based on something you've received from the other. All of this is empathy. All of it is empathy. And I think we're seeing artificial intelligence and voice assistants, maybe specifically, learn how to do that really, really well. So I'm intrigued and fascinated. I'm fascinated by the progress that voice assistants will make. And you referenced this earlier. If there are a couple of things which I think are very interesting and challenging. If emotion is one of the key drivers of engagement between a customer and a brand. The voice conveys multiple times more emotion than the image. So the opportunity, I think, for brands to start thinking about themselves and start thinking about their interactions with customers via the voice. As I said at the beginning of our chat, I spent my life in marketing, digital marketing agencies, and the voice of the brand used to be a metaphor. It's no longer a metaphor. It's becoming something real. You're seeing examples like Visa, notably one of the early adopters, who are looking for, what's the sound? What does Visa sound like? For me, this is the oral equivalent of the Coke bottle. So you see a Coke bottle, you know exactly what you're looking at. You don't need to see the brand name. You see the bottle. What's the oral equivalent of that? I'll say one more thing now. I'll stop talking, but I am fascinated by this. Capital One, who's a pretty interesting financial services organization in the sense that I think they get customer experience almost more than anyone else, almost more. They hired somebody from Pixar to help them think about the voice of Capital One. And I think there's so much that we're yet to tap, but early adopters are already thinking about it. And I think that's fascinating. And I think for me, that will be the most impactful manifestation of artificial intelligence.
So let's be somewhat cynical, right? We've had technology to support customer service, IVRs and bots and so on. It just seems like corporations often deploy them and think, okay, that's good enough. And then the human disappears, right? I talked to an executive 6 months ago. He's a technology executive. And he says, Vinnie, one of the nicest things during the pandemic is you call and a human actually answers the phone, right? I mean, you talk about empathy and nothing can beat a human. So how do we make sure we don't become too dependent on machines and the human is still part of the chain?
Well, I think there's a growing awareness, I really do believe there's a growing awareness of the importance of humanity in exchanges. I'll give you a silly example, a recent example. It's not silly. A colleague of mine in the UK called, it was actually Vodafone, for a contract question. And so she went through the usual kind of IVR tree. And as she was going through, the last message she heard before she was transferred to a person, and she was getting irate as she was going through, press 3, press 5, press 9. The last message she heard was, all of our employees are currently working from home, so please excuse them if you hear the sound of a dog barking or children playing. So, boom, what just happened? That we used an IVR to make an interaction more human. So when the person eventually picked up the phone, the whole tone of the exchange had changed. So I think, I really do believe that you're right. I will say this, and you mentioned contact centers specifically. So let's look at that. So what has happened in contact center over time in terms of the experience? I'm sure you visited them. I visited many of them too. So 10 years ago, it was all about process. It was all about how can we sharpen the process? How can we reduce the time per call? How can we get more efficient? 5 years ago, and even to some degree still today, we've overlaid technology onto that process because the technology is making with Genesis and NICE, we're making significant progress in technology. The truth is, I think we've exhausted those levers of optimizing the contact center experience. There's only one lever left, and that's a human being. So really creating, really empowering a new type of contact center employee, a more informed type. USAA do a great job. USAA form all of their form all of their contact center associates in financial well-being, in financial health. So you're creating a context in which the first line of your company talking to your customers really understands the context of the customer, the context of the question.
Is fragmentation going away? Because I recently had to deal with a big brand, and I dealt with their store. Nothing happened. Then I went to call center. Nothing happened. I went to the Twitter.
Yeah.
By this time, I was publicly telling them I was upset, so I got a little more attention, right? Yeah. But even there, you could see it was fragmented. The customer master available to each source was very different.
Absolutely right. And
these are smart companies. Why did they have such dumb fragmentation and policies?
It's indeed, these are smart companies. I will say two things about that. We've been talking about the experience economy since 1998. We're now in 2021. How many companies can you name who really compete on experience? I bet you can name 10. I probably would name the same 10. And if we asked 100 people, we probably get, broadly speaking, the same answer. So only a few companies have really worked it out. And then again, for me, they're the guys who recognize that customer centricity is the true north. Everything else needs to be subservient to the experience. So the organizational silos, the existing infrastructure, everything needs to be aligned to the experience. So let me give you an example of somebody who's done that. I think Sephora. I think Sephora, for me, is one of the best retailers in the world. And if you compare them, for example, with Macy's, why Macy's? Because Macy's most profitable and most central offer is cosmetics. As when you walk into a Macy's, you walk into a cosmetics store. As Macy's has declined, unfortunately, but has declined, Sephora has grown at exactly the same pace, or almost exactly the same pace. Why is that? So what's so different? The products are not different. Products are exactly the same. There's less selection at a Sephora than there is at a Macy's, in fact. So what's the difference? And the difference is experience. And the difference is the way Sephora uses technology in a really joined up way to facilitate the experience of the consumer. If I wanted to book a makeup session in a Sephora store tomorrow, I can do that via my Alexa device, and it's seamless. Can you imagine the work behind that? There's a ton of infrastructure and platform stitching together. So fragmentation is going away for those companies who have understood that you need a true north.
What many of the examples you're providing are consumer focus, right? Are you seeing similar improvements in the enterprise customer experience management?
It's slower. It's slower. It's a little bit more complicated, I'm going to say, for a partner experience or for a consumer experience for a B2B company, because you have a buyer and you have so many influencers. And I understand that it's more complicated, but we are seeing companies make strides in the B2B space, but they're slower to learn from the examples of consumer companies than honestly they could be.
What else excites you? Look ahead. Where do you see some significant improvements?
So I see. I think you've got the point on voice. So I'm not going to spend too much time there. But artificial intelligence. So two things that I really care about, and we think about this as intimacy plus industrialization. So they feel like opposing forces, and in some ways they are. But to succeed, you have to do both. So I'm excited about the fact, and I think COVID is an accelerant for this. I'm excited about the fact that companies are learning more quickly than they might otherwise have done, that really understanding the needs and the drivers of behavior of their consumers, be they customers, be they citizens, be they constituents, be they whatever audience type you want in a B2B, B2C, B2B2C environment, understanding what drives the behavior of those consumers, what's valuable for the brand, bringing that together in the experience, and then using in the notions, every notion of industrialization to deliver that experience with agility, with speed, and with this kind of scale you need. So I'm excited about that. I do believe we've turned the corner, and I think Cognizant is well placed as a company, and I'm very happy to be at the center of that with our company and be helping our clients make that on that journey.
Well, I'm glad you're optimistic. If you wouldn't be, I would be very concerned about the state of customer service. Thank you so much. Appreciate you providing us the wisdom and the examples.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.